wilderness is a merciless place. It does not forgive betrayal. When the cold tightens its grip on your lungs and hope fades with the last trace of daylight, help can come from where you least expect it. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith. That even after losing everything, salvation can be found in the eyes of a loyal animal. Before we begin this unforgettable story of courage, cruelty, and grace, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Do you believe animals can carry a purer kind of loyalty than humans? If this story speaks to you, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support helps these stories reach the hearts that need them most. Winter arrived early in the mountains of western Montana, dragging a hard metallic cold across the forest, pressing the sky low and turning every sound brittle and sharp. Daniel Carter stood at the edge of the ranger station porch, breath blooming white against his beard, eyes scanning the endless pines as snow whispered down like ash from an unseen fire. At 38, Daniel looked older than his years, tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man carved for endurance rather than speed, with a weathered face marked by a broken nose that had never been set quite right, a thin scar cutting through his right eyebrow and a close, cropped dark beard already threaded with gray. His eyes were a muted steel blue, alert, distant, burdened, and they rarely rested long on any single thing. A habit born from years in combat zones where stillness could kill. Once a Navy SEAL, Daniel had left the teams 3 years earlier, after a mission in Helmand Province ended with 2 men dead, and one decision he still replayed in his sleep. The official reports called it unavoidable. His conscience called it something else. Since then, silence had become his chosen punishment, and Montana, raw, indifferent, honest, was the only place that didn't lie to him. At his side sat Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a heavy chest and powerful hindquarter sable fur, darkened almost to black along the spine, muzzle dusted with early gray. Rex's left ear bent slightly at the tip from an old shrapnel wound, and his amber eyes missed nothing. Trained as a military working dog, Rex moved with disciplined economy, every shift of weight deliberate, every breath measured. To strangers, he appeared calm, almost aloof. But Daniel knew the truth. Rex was relentlessly loyal, stubborn to the point of defiance, and deeply sensitive to Daniel's moods, often rising before nightmares broke into sound, pressing his solid warmth against Daniel's ribs until the shaking stopped. Daniel had pulled Rex out of the military adoption program himself, refusing to let the dog be retired into a cage after injury. "We'll leave together," he'd said then, a promise spoken more to himself than to the handlers. That promise was the closest thing to faith he still had. The radio on Daniel's belt crackled once, routine traffic from the county office, but nothing urgent. He stepped down into the snow boots, sinking with a familiar steady crunch, and Rex rose instantly, matching him stride for stride. The patrol was supposed to be simple: check trail markers, log weather conditions, verify that the north boundary of the protected zone remained undisturbed. Daniel preferred these quiet assignments. There were no people to disappoint, no commands to second guess, only the honest feedback of cold and distance. A mile in, Rex stopped, his body's stiffened tail lowering, ears forward. Daniel followed the dog's gaze and felt the old tension coil in his spine. Tire tracks, wide aggressive treads from an off-road vehicle cut across the fresh snow, angling deeper into land clearly marked as federal wilderness. Daniel crouched, gloved fingers tracing the grooves. Fresh, less than a day old, his jaw tightened. Illegal access here wasn't just a fine. It was a statement, the kind made by men who believed money or muscle bent rules. "Someone's testing the fence," Daniel muttered, voice rough from Dessous. Rex sniffed the tracks, then looked back at him, eyes questioning but ready. Daniel's thoughts drifted uninvited to Sarah Mitchell, the deputy wildlife officer who worked out of Missoula. Sarah was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with long auburn hair, usually pulled into a practical braid, freckled skin weathered by sun and wind, and sharp green eyes that missed little. She spoke plainly, laughed rarely, and carried herself with the steady confidence of someone who had learned early not to wait for permission. They shared coffee sometimes after reports were filed, speaking mostly about work. Never about why Daniel flinched at helicopters or why Sarah's left hand trembled when she thought no one noticed. He should radio her now. He didn't. Old instincts whispered that this was better handled quietly, at least until he knew more. Daniel straightened, snow creaking under his knees, and glanced once more at the darkening sky. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Rex took the lead without command, following the tracks with silent precision. Daniel followed, one hand resting near the old service knife at his hip, the other clenched into a fist to keep it from shaking. Somewhere ahead something had crossed a line. He didn't yet know that by sunset that line would cut straight through his life, forcing him to choose once again between walking away and standing his ground, with only a dog beside him and the cold waiting patiently to see what kind of man he truly was. The tracks led Daniel deeper into the trees, away from the marked trail, and into a stretch of forest that felt older than law, older than memory. Snow thickened beneath the pines' swallowing sound, forcing him to slow his breathing, the way he had been trained to do in hostile territory. Rex moved ahead with controlled urgency, nose low, tail steady, muscles rolling beneath his dense coat like coiled rope. The dog was no longer simply tracking rubber and oil. His posture told Daniel something sharper lay ahead. Daniel's gloved hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing the worn handle of his knife, a reflex carved into him by years when hesitation meant body bags. He told himself this was Montana, not Helmand. But the forest answered with the same cold indifference he remembered from deserts half a world away. The tracks ended abruptly at a narrow clearing where the trees thinned and the ground dipped toward an abandoned fire lookout tower, its metal frame rusted skeletal, half buried in drifts. Daniel straightened, scanning the perimeter. That was when the first shot rang out, not loud, but sharp, snapping the silence clean in half. Rex lunged instinctively, barking once, then yelping as something struck near his shoulder, knocking him sideways into the snow. Daniel reacted without thought. He dove, rolling behind a fallen log as a second shot tore bark from the trunk inches above where his head had been. "Rex," he shouted, heart slamming against his ribs. The dog struggled up, limping, but alive eyes, fierce teeth bared. 3 figures emerged from the trees opposite the clearing, moving with the confidence of men who believed the world belonged to them. The first was Ethan Cole, a man in his mid-40s, tall and lean, with a sharp, angular face that looked permanently amused. His hair was silver at the temples, meticulously groomed even out here, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a smile that never reached his eyes. Ethan wore a pristine white winter jacket over expensive tactical gear, the kind bought not earned. He had grown up poor in Idaho, clawed his way into money through mining contracts and political favors, and now carried himself with the entitlement of someone who believed survival proved superiority. Beside him stood Mark Delaney, younger, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a broken boxer's nose. Mark's eyes were flat, obedient, the look of a man who followed orders because thinking hurt too much. The third man, Kyle Brewer, lingered slightly behind, thinner, twitchy, his red beard, unkempt hands gripping his rifle too tight. He was nervous. Daniel noted the weak link. Ethan raised a hand lazily. "Easy there," he called, voice almost friendly. "You're trespassing." Daniel laughed once harsh. "Federal land," he replied. "You are." Ethan's smile widened. "Funny thing about lines on maps," he said, stepping closer. "They only matter if someone enforces them." Daniel felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the same anger that had gotten him written up, sidelined, and eventually pushed out of the teams. He glanced at Rex, who stood braced, despite the limp blood darkening the fur near his shoulder. That sight settled something inside Daniel, hard and immovable. "You shot my dog," he said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Rubber round. Mostly. He'll live." The casual cruelty in his tone told Daniel everything he needed to know. He reached slowly for his radio. Ethan sighed as if disappointed. The next moments came fast. Mark moved first, slamming into Daniel from the side, driving him into the snow. Kyle fired again, not at Daniel, but near Rex's feet, forcing the dog back with a startled bark. Daniel fought like a man who had done this too many times, elbows and knees, finding soft spots. But numbers and surprise won. A blow to the back of his head sent stars exploding across his vision. When he came to, the world had narrowed to pain and cold. His wrists were bound behind him with industrial zip ties, reinforced with steel wire arms stretched back and secured to one of the lookout tower's support beams. The metal burned through his jacket, leaching heat from his bones. Rex lay several yards away on his side chest, rising in shallow, rapid breaths. Daniel tried to call out, but a boot pressed into his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. Ethan crouched in front of him, expression thoughtful. "You could have just called it in," he said. "But men like you never do. Always think you're the last line. He stood brushing snow from his gloves. We're done here. By morning, the cold will take care of the rest. Daniel spat blood into the snow. You won't get away with this. Ethan smiled again, thin and sharp. I already have. The men disappeared back into the trees, their laughter fading with the light. Darkness crept in, the temperature dropping fast. Daniel strained against his bindings, feeling skin tear beneath the wire, but the beam didn't give. He turned his head, fear clawing at his chest as he watched Rex stir, then slowly, painfully lift his head. Their eyes met. In that look passed a wordless understanding forged in fire and dust and long nights far from home. Daniel swallowed, forcing his voice steady. Stay with me, he whispered. Snow began to fall harder, sealing the clearing in white. The cold pressed closer, patient and absolute. And Daniel realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about whether loyalty, his and Rex's, could still mean something in a world that kept trying to erase it. Night fell without ceremony the way it always did in the Montana backcountry, swift and absolute, erasing the last traces of color until the world narrowed to black, white, and pain. Daniel hung against the steel beam of the abandoned lookout, breath shallow, chest tight, as the cold seeped through layers of fabric and into muscle and bone. The zip ties and wire bit deeper each time. He shifted, skin torn beneath them, warmth leaking away in slow, deliberate theft. He forced himself to breathe evenly, counting in fours like he used to on Overwatch, because panic wasted heat, and heat was life. A few yards away, Rex lay motionless in the snow. Daniel's heart stuttered every time the dog failed to move, every second, stretching thin with dread. Rex, he rasped, voice barely carrying. Hey, stay with me. The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, painfully, Rex lifted his head, amber eyes dull with shock, but focused, locking onto Daniel as if the rest of the world had already been dismissed. Blood had crusted along the fur at his shoulder, dark against the pale snow, and his breathing came fast, uneven. He tried to stand, failed, then tried again with a low, frustrated whine. Daniel swallowed hard, guilt and fear tangling in his chest. He'd seen this before, men pushing past pain because stopping meant dying. Easy, Daniel murmured, though his own hands were numb and useless behind him. I'm here. Rex dragged himself closer, hindquarters stiff, injured leg barely touching the ground. Each movement cost him, but loyalty had always been Rex's defining flaw. When he reached Daniel, he didn't hesitate. The dog pressed his broad chest against Daniel's knees, and then with a grunt of effort climbed partially into Daniel's lap, settling his weight there. The heat was immediate and shocking, a living furnace against Daniel's frozen thighs. Rex adjusted, curling his body to block the wind, his head resting against Daniel's hip, breath puffing warm clouds into the air. Daniel closed his eyes, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, breaking loose before he could stop it. Good boy, he whispered. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Minutes blurred, hours maybe. Daniel drifted in and out, fighting the seductive pull of sleep, remembering training manuals that warned how warmth could lie, how comfort could be the final trick before everything went dark. He thought of Sarah Mitchell, then unbidden. Sarah, with her tall, wary frame and that permanent squint from years of snow glare, auburn hair escaping its braid, no matter how tight she tied it. She'd grown up on a ranch outside Bozeman, learned early how to fix engines and broken fences, learned later how to bury a younger brother lost to a winter avalanche. That loss had carved a quiet seriousness into her, made her relentless about safety protocols, about calling things in, even when it annoyed people like Daniel. Don't play hero, she'd told him once. Green eyes, steady freckles stark against wind-burned skin. Heroes die alone out there. He wondered if she'd notice he missed check-in by morning. He wondered if she'd care. Rex shifted, letting out a soft growl. Not aggressive, but insistent, as if answering Daniel's spiraling thoughts. Daniel focused on the dog's warmth, on the steady rise and fall of his ribs. He tested his fingers again, willing sensation back, imagining blood flowing where it refused to go. The cold knot at his feet, now a deep aching numbness that frightened him more than pain ever had. Frostbite crept quietly. He knew that, too. A faint sound cut through the night. A metallic rattle carried on the wind. Daniel's eyes snapped open. The old lookout tower's radio antenna half collapsed, but still bolted to the frame, swayed slightly, tapping against rusted metal. His radio. He dropped it when Mark tackled him. It lay several feet away, half buried in snow, its small red light blinking weakly. Hope flared sharp and dangerous. "Rex," Daniel whispered, leaning forward as far as his bindings allowed. "I need you to listen." The dog lifted his head, ears pricked despite exhaustion. Daniel angled his chin toward the radio. "Bring it." Rex followed his gaze, eyes narrowing, assessing. He stood unsteadily, favoring his injured leg, and took a step toward the radio. The effort drew a sharp whine from his throat, but he didn't stop. He reached the device, sniffed it, then gripped it gently between his teeth, careful not to crack the casing. The sight nearly broke Daniel. Rex turned, dragging the radio through the snow. Each step labored until he dropped it within inches of Daniel's boot. Daniel laughed weakly, a sound torn from his chest. "That's it," he said, voice shaking. He twisted, straining, finally managing to bump the radio's emergency switch with the toe of his boot. The light turned solid. A thin, hopeful chirp sounded as the signal activated. Daniel sagged back, spent. Rex collapsed beside him again, pressing close, sharing what warmth he had left. Snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, burying tracks, muffling sound. Somewhere beyond the trees, the world still turned unaware. Here, bound to steel and held together by fur and stubbornness, Daniel clung to consciousness, knowing only this: the night had not won yet, and as long as Rex breathed beside him, neither had he. Morning did not arrive with light so much as a subtle loosening of darkness, the sky shifting from black to iron gray as the storm thinned its grip on the forest. Daniel surfaced from a shallow, fractured sleep, with the ache of cold lodged deep in his bones and Rex's weight still pressed firmly against his legs. Every breath burned, his wrists were numb beyond pain, fingers useless hooks behind him, but he was alive. And so was the dog. Rex's chest rose and fell in steady, stubborn rhythm. The radio's indicator light glowed a dim, stubborn red near Daniel's boot, its battery already losing ground to the cold. He focused on that light the way he once focused on distant ridge lines through a scope, willing it to matter. Rex lifted his head, ears angling sharply. At first, Daniel thought it was another trick of exhaustion, the way the mind invents sounds to stay sane, but then he heard it too. A low, distant thrum, barely more than a vibration, carried through the frozen air. A helicopter. Hope hit him hard enough to make his vision blur. Rex pushed himself upright with a strained grunt, and barked once, sharp and clear, then again louder, throwing the sound into the trees. Daniel twisted, craning his neck until pain sparked white behind his eyes. The thrum grew steadier, resolving into the unmistakable chop of rotor blades. Moments later, a flash of movement cut across the sky beyond the clearing. The helicopter circled once, then again, slow and deliberate. A woman's voice crackled from Daniel's radio, thin but unmistakably real. "This is Montana's search and rescue. Emergency signal received. Identify if able." Daniel dragged air into his lungs. "Daniel Carter," he rasped, forcing strength into the words. "Former Navy SEAL, I'm restrained at an abandoned lookout near the north boundary. I have an injured K-9 with me." There was a brief pause. Then relief edged the reply. "Copy that, Carter. Hold position. We have visual." The helicopter descended carefully beyond the tree-lined snow, whipping into a frenzy beneath it. Two figures emerged from the swirling white. The first was Sarah Mitchell. In daylight she looked exactly as Daniel remembered, tall and spare, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone used to terrain that punished mistakes. Her auburn hair was braided tight down her back, frost already clinging to loose strands, and her pale freckled skin was flushed from cold and exertion. Her green eyes locked onto Daniel, immediately sharp with concern and a flash of restrained anger. She wore a heavy ranger jacket marked with the state seal, and carried herself like someone who had spent her life walking toward danger rather than away from it. Beside her moved Tom Alvarez, a SAR medic in his early 40s, with a compact muscular build, dark hair peppered with gray, and a thick mustache that framed a mouth set permanently into calm focus. Tom's eyes were kind but efficient, the look of a man who had seen too many broken bodies to waste time on panic. "Jesus, Carter," Sarah muttered as she reached him, fingers already checking the bindings at his wrists. "You always ignore protocol, or just when it's convenient." Daniel huffed a weak laugh. "Good to see you too." Tom knelt by Rex, assessing the dog with practiced hands. 6-year-old shepherd, he said quietly, reading the signs. "Shoulder wound, likely non-lethal hypothermia risk, but he's fighting it." Rex growled faintly, more protest than threat, and Tom smiled. "Easy, buddy. You did good." Sarah cut through the wire and zip ties with quick, precise movements. Sensation crashed back into Daniel's arms in a brutal wave. Pain sharp enough to steal his breath. He slumped forward, barely staying upright as Sarah caught his shoulders. For a moment, the professional mask slipped and her grip tightened, grounding real. "You're not allowed to die out here," she said, voice low and fierce. "I already buried enough people to winter." Daniel met her gaze, understanding the weight behind the words. Tom wrapped Daniel in thermal blankets, while another rescuer, young blonde and wide-eyed, barely out of his 20s, helped steady Rex onto a padded sled. The dog resisted until Daniel reached out, numb fingers curling weakly into thick fur. "It's okay," Daniel murmured. "They've got you." Rex's ears relaxed. Trust absolute, and he allowed himself to be moved. As they guided Daniel toward the helicopter, he caught one last glimpse of the clearing, the rusted tower, the blood-darkened snow, the place where winter had nearly finished him. The helicopter lifted, carrying them away as the forest shrank below. Daniel leaned his head back against the seat, exhaustion finally claiming ground. Through it all, Rex's head rested against his knee, warm and solid. The night had tried to erase them, but loyalty had answered back louder than the cold. Spring did not arrive all at once in western Montana. It crept in carefully, as if unsure it was welcome, loosening the snow's grip one quiet morning at a time. Daniel Carter noticed it first from the small rehabilitation cabin overlooking the valley where meltwater traced silver lines down the mountainside and sunlight lingered a few minutes longer each day. His right hand still ached, when the weather shifted fingers stiff from nerve damage that would never fully disappear. But the pain had softened into something manageable, a reminder rather than a sentence. Daniel himself looked changed, leaner now, beard trimmed, shorter eyes. The weight he carried had not vanished, but it no longer pressed him into the ground. At his feet lay Rex stretched across a patch of dry earth, just outside the open door. The German Shepherd's shoulder bore a thin, healing scar, fur growing back darker along the line, and his gait would never again be as fast as it once was. At 6 years old, Rex had slowed, but his presence was steady, watchful, content. Retirement suited him in a way neither of them had expected. Inside the cabin, Sarah Mitchell stood at the small kitchen counter. Sleeves rolled up, auburn hair, loose today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Without the uniform, she looked less like an officer, and more like the woman she rarely let anyone see. Tall, wary, sunbrush scattered across her nose, green eyes, warm but alert. She moved with practiced efficiency. But there was ease in it now, a lightness Daniel hadn't seen before. The avalanche that took her brother years ago still lived in her, shaping her caution and her resolve, but it no longer defined every breath she took. She glanced toward the doorway, catching Daniel watching her, and shook her head with a faint smile. "You're supposed to be resting," she said. "Doctor's orders." "I am," Daniel replied. "Just supervising." Rex thumped his tail once as if to confirm the arrangement. Outside, a truck pulled up along the dirt road. The driver stepped out slowly, carefully, leaning on a cane. Ethan Cole looked smaller now, stripped of his tailored arrogance. His once immaculate hair was uncombed, beard grown in uneven patches. Sharp angles of his face softened by exhaustion and regret. Prison orange had been replaced by plain denim and a worn jacket, but the weight of consequence clung to him more visibly than any uniform ever had. He stopped a respectful distance from the cabin, eyes flicking to Rex and then back to Daniel. "I was told I could speak to you," Ethan said quietly. His voice lacked its former edge. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Justice had moved swiftly after the rescue evidence uncovered, accomplices turned illegal operations exposed. Ethan had pleaded guilty. This visit was not about forgiveness. Daniel knew that. It was about closure. "You have 5 minutes, Daniel said. Ethan nodded, swallowing. "I won't pretend I didn't deserve what I got," he said. "But I wanted you to know. I never expected you to survive. Or the dog." His gaze dropped. "Turns out some debts don't stay buried." Daniel felt no surge of anger, only a distant sadness for what people chose to become. "Take care of yourself," he said finally. "Somewhere else." Ethan inclined his head once accepted the dismissal and walked back to his truck. The road swallowed him and Daniel felt something settle, quiet, and final. Later that afternoon, Tom Alvarez arrived with a small group from search and rescue, bringing supplies and laughter. Tom looked the same as always, solid. Calm mustache, flecked with gray eyes, kind and sharp. He knelt to scratch Rex behind the ears. "He's famous now," Tom said. "Training units ask about him." Rex huffed softly, uninterested in fame. As the sun dipped lower, the cabin filled with warmth and voices with plans spoken aloud for the first time. Daniel listened, surprised to hear himself talk about the future. Not the next patrol or the next emergency, but a training program for retired Kainses, a place where dogs like Rex could heal alongside the people who loved them. Sarah met his eyes across the room, understanding passing between them without words. When evening came and the others left, Daniel stepped outside again. The valley lay open before him, green pushing through white life, insisting. Rex joined him, leaning gently into his leg. Sarah slipped an arm around Daniel's waist, resting her head against his shoulder. "You stayed," she said softly. Daniel nodded, watching the last of the snow retreat into shadow. "So did he," he replied, fingers threading into Rex's fur. In that quiet moment, surrounded by thawing earth and steady hearts, Daniel understood that survival was not the same as living, and that sometimes, with loyalty and patience, the cold finally learned a different name. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly on four tired legs, through loyalty that refuses to give up, or through a stranger who answers a call at just the right moment. In moments when the cold feels endless and hope seems far away, God often works through love, courage, and compassion, reminding us that we are never truly alone. Just as Daniel was saved not only by strength but by faith, loyalty, and grace, we too are carried through our darkest days by unseen hands. May this story remind you that even when life feels harsh, God is still present in kindness, in second chances, and in the people and animals who walk beside us. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from or what this story meant to you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you, protect you, and bring warmth to your life, just as He did on that cold mountain.